Okay, I guess it is officially time to start class, 10 minutes after 2. Welcome to, this is Legal Studies 160, a course called Punishment, Culture, and Society. That's not the flight you intended to be on. This would be an excellent time to exit and perhaps go to the class you really want to be in. If not, welcome. I'm glad you're here. This is probably among the least comfortable looking rooms I've seen at Cal, and I've seen quite a few of them, so that's saying a lot. And then we do have a few empty seats here and there. I don't know, is everyone sitting somewhere? If you're in the back and would like to sit down, this would be a great time to kind of squish by your colleagues. They can move their laptops and work you through. There's seats over here. While people are sort of swarming around, I also want to take this opportunity to welcome our audience at home or around the world on podcast. This class will be podcast, which will be of, I think, some benefit to you for those times that you must unavoidably miss what would otherwise be, I'm sure, your top priority to attend my lectures. These sessions, of course, won't be podcast, so even more imperative to be there. And unfortunately, those are not open to our podcast audience. We're very glad to welcome you to Berkeley, give you an opportunity to get a little bit of a taste of, I think, the excitement we have at Berkeley without maybe having to pay the huge fees that the students in front of you are, although you're not going to get the benefit of our great GSIs or get us to read your paper, etc. You can hear our lectures. Just to make sure you know that I'm not in a closet somewhere on campus or in my house faking this. I'm going to count to 2 and ask this audience to say, "Go Bears." 1, 2. Go Bears. All right, so they didn't do that well this year, but there are a lot of Cal students here who are nonetheless keep the faith. And I have to say, I can't start a legal studies course at Berkeley without just reflecting about my own undergraduate days at Berkeley and how exciting it was to be a Cal student. I feel a little bit ashamed when I speak to current student audiences because I know just how much harder it is to get in here, and I almost certainly would not be among the class if I had not had the great fortune to graduate in high school in the 70s when you could sort of if showing up was at least half the effort. Now, obviously, it takes a whole lot more, but for those who do make it here, it's also a whole lot harder to afford this. And I'm saying this partly to people maybe listening to this around the world who think that Berkeley, or keep in mind that Berkeley is one of the world's renowned educational institutions, but may not know that we're sort of hanging by our nails here, or literally hanging by our students and their parents' bank accounts, and there's not too much more we can do to take more from that. And so some of you maybe are in a position to help us out a little bit. You could visit our website and make a large donation to the Berkeley Undergraduate Fund, and do say that Legal Studies 160 motivated you to do so. Okay, so one more note for those that are watching or listening. I should say you will get screen capture, but you won't get to see me, and therefore you won't get the jokes. But you're welcome to listen in any event. And if you want to participate by reading some of the materials that we have up on BSpace, you can join BSpace by sending an email to me at jsimon@law.berkeley.edu or .law.berkeley.edu, or just Google me, Jonathan Simon Berkeley. I'll come up pretty close to the top. Okay. The other thing is there's a syllabus for this class, which I think everybody hopefully got through our BSpace announcement, and which you can get online if you visit our website once I've connected you to BSpace. That syllabus is very important for those of you, especially here in the room, who are going to be taking this class for credit. It's got a lot of information about course requirements, what we're going to be reading, how severe the punishments are for plagiarism, and things of this nature that could be relevant to a course on punishment, of course. So read that. I know in this busy age, if it's longer than a tweet, it may not get read. This is a bit longer, but it does have all the readings. And in fact, only one book was assigned for this course because I knew it was available, which was a special issue of the journal Daedalus, and I'm told that NEDS or some other stores would have that. Has anyone seen it? I see blank stares around the room, at least one person. Did you find it? Okay, so it may or may not show up. The good news is it's all available online. If you're clicking to it through a university network computer, you should be able to open up PDFs. And I've got it in the syllabus, all of those readings. I happen to like holding onto a real volume when you can still get one. And so if you want, that book will be available to you. All the other readings, including those readings, are mostly in journal articles online. You can print them out. We're not going to do that for you and charge you. And in a few cases, they are on the BSpace where there's not an existing PDF on the web. All right. That said, I'm too excited about the beginning of this course this year to spend a lot of our first introductory class getting into the details of the syllabus and what's going to be on the exam and the midterm and the paper. Read about it. I'll be happy to answer your questions next time on Thursday when we get together. But what I want to do today is really plunge into some of the themes of the course. And by way of an introduction to the course, sort of talk to you about this, I think, very important Brown versus Plata decision that came down just about a year ago, a little longer, less than a year ago, in May 23rd, in fact, 2011. How many of you, at least before you read the materials for today, if you did read them, had heard of Brown versus Plata? Raise your hand if you had heard of Brown versus Plata. And let the record indicate that about a half, maybe a little less than half the class had heard of that. That's a little disturbing to me, only because I know that Berkeley students are among the most aware students around, and that I think at least this is a potentially game-changing historic decision. But it's not obvious that it is, so don't feel bad if you hadn't heard of it yet. The media is only paying some attention to it. In any event, through talking about this case today, and by the way, I didn't even assign the case to you because I wasn't sure how much reading I could expect you to do on the first day, but we will be talking about this case in some ways throughout the rest of the course. In some ways, you might think like today is your introduction to this class, and this class, and this case, and on the last day of the course, hopefully you'll read that case and you'll see the possibilities in it that I see. Come on in, have a seat there or anywhere that's free. Okay, why is this such an exciting time to be studying punishment, culture, and society? Well, as you'll see beginning next week, when we're going to take a week, in a sense, to step back from culture and society and talk about punishment, the kind of individual imperative to punish that many of us feel, especially once we have kids. And understand that in psychological terms, as well as some philosophical efforts to think about the role of punishment. And from that point of view, we might observe that punishment is almost a universal when it comes to human societies, where we're not aware of any human society that hasn't had some kind of penal institutions in it, not necessarily our own kind of institutions, but distinct penal institutions. Every kind of subsocial unit, whether it's a family or the bar association or the baseball association, etc., has their own ways of punishing people as well. So it's a very strong imperative that seems to be cross-cultural, ahistorical on some level. And yet, when we bring the culture and society perspective back in, what we notice is penal change. And much of what the course will be about is penal change. What explains it? What drives it? What is that sound that is driving us all crazy? I don't know if you guys can hear it at home, but maybe shutting the door would at least be a start. This is living with the permanent construction zone. Perhaps that is the Berkeley campus these days. Now, California today, and I know that this is Berkeley, so we don't view ourselves as studying just California because we're here. We're studying punishment in society as a global phenomenon, but it happens to be that California is one of the world's essentially laboratories of punishment in society. We've had a dramatically volatile penal system for most of the last 75 years or so, and we've kind of regularly been at the forefront of changes in the very basic assumptions about what punishment should be about. Now, today, literally in this class, as opposed to the last time I taught it, which is only about 2 years ago, there has been really profound sense of change. And I want to start with an image from the recent headlines. If you've been paying attention to tourism disasters from around the world, that happens to be a tour boat in the Mediterranean that a huge one, actually looks a lot like the Titanic, and comparisons have been made, that has partially sunk, as you can see, in waters just off a beautiful-looking island off the west coast of Italy. But here I want you to imagine that it's a symbol for our penal ship of state. And in California, it's a very big ship. takes up about 10% of our budget every year, which, as you know, is more than we spend now on higher education. And as you can imagine through this picture, it is a big ship that has hit a reef, that has really, at a moment of apparent necessity to change. Sometimes we change because we want to, sometimes we change because we hit a reef. And in this case, the penal ship of state has hit a reef. We've got a mega lawsuit that Brown versus Plata is the culmination of, but that has been involving virtually all of the prisons in California for well over a decade now in tremendous amount of litigation. And this is a change that you're going to be in an incredible position to watch, because literally the new penal experiment that we're in the middle of literally began on October 1st, 2011. That's when what's called realignment went into effect, a new strategy, if you will, a new proto-penal policy for California. And it represents, as I said, an abandonment of 40 years in which California, perhaps more than any other state in the country, was committed to growing the prison population as a project, as a fundamental policy. We expanded prisons. Basically, during the 80s and 90s, we built 22 new prisons in California. Turned out to be not nearly enough to keep up with the size of the population we were putting there, but it represented, twice as many prisons as we had built in the previous century of California history. It was a period when we built almost no universities, no colleges, as you well know. So it was a rather dramatic development, and that is what we're experiencing a major turn in. Now, what was the cause of this amazing kind of catastrophe for the ship of state, the penal ship of state here? Did it involve a decisive decision by our political leadership, for example, to turn around and say, well, California's heading in the wrong direction, in fact, we've hit a reef, let's go back in the other direction? And the answer to that is no, or at least it's very hard to make a case that California's leaders have been the forefront of penal change. This is a picture which some of you will recognize that shows no fewer than 6 past and, in one case, future, isn't that weird? Past and future California governor. So you've got, basically reading from this side of the screen to that, you've got Gray Davis, Pete Wilson, what was his name? Oh, Schwarzenegger, Jerry Brown, the youngest governor ever in the 1970s, and now the oldest governor ever in the 2010s, and Governor Duke Machen. So no fewer than 6 heads of state. California, 2 different political parties. These folks are not allies. They don't normally show up at the same event. So what event are they showing up at? Does anyone recognize and know your California ballot initiatives by year and number well enough to know what sign these very disparate gentlemen are gathered behind, along with a few other heavyweights from California law enforcement? Anybody? What are they saying no to? 5. Yes, thank you. They're saying no to 5, and what would 5 have done? Anybody? Anyone heard of 3 strikes? So California has a very infamous law that is now responsible for about, I'd say, 30,000 or so of our overcrowded prisoners in the system, who are there from. California has a law designed to send violent recidivist criminals to prison either for longer periods if they're on their second strike or for life on their third strike. What lots of California voters didn't know when they voted for this law in 1994 is that you don't have to actually commit a violent or serious felony to get that life sentence. In fact, when it's your third strike, it can be any felony. Even on your second strike, which adds 10 years to what would otherwise be your sentence, can be any felony if you've had a previous serious or violent felony. Lawyers write this stuff, so you can imagine that the category serious felony contains a lot of different moving parts. In any event, 5 would have modified 3 strikes to be a little less inclusive. It would have basically said you have to commit a violent or serious crime for your third strike to get a third strike life sentence, and for your second strike to get a second strike extended sentence. So in short, it was the kind of law that you might expect any political leader that wanted to see California begin to turn the ship of state away from let's incarcerate as many people for as long as possible to a more sort of let's make a judgment about whether we need to incarcerate this person, somewhat more detailed or individualized approach. But no, in fact, you have the entire political establishment of the state, including the current governor who's leading our reform efforts, basically saying no, this will let dangerous criminals on the street, rapists, etc. There was robocalls and the usual apparatus of California justice. So the change that we're seeing now is very much a product of this case that I'm claiming to you is a very, very important case that nobody's ever heard of, but you will certainly have by the end of the semester, and that's Brown versus Plata. And here you have no better, it's hard to find a better judge of what would be a radical injunction in our nation's history than Justice Antonin Scalia, who certainly knows our nation's history and is, as you know, a deeply conservative justice. And he describes the Brown versus Plata majority, which he voted against, as, quote, the most radical injunction issued by a court in our nation's history, an order requiring California to release a staggering number of 46,000 convicted criminals. Now, keep in mind that almost nothing is true about that statement other than the fact that I think he's right to say that this is probably the most radical injunction in our nation's history. However, it does not purport to and has not, will not, could not, probably, or at least will not, result in the release of 46,000 convicted criminals. In fact, no single person who was in prison on May 23rd, 2011 in California when this decision came down will be, quote, released as a result of it. One of the third rails in California political life now is no early release. It's sort of up there with changing Prop 13, amnesty for immigrants in say, Arizona. It's one of those red zones or third rails, to use another metaphor, that you don't touch. We don't do early release. Instead, as we'll see, this reduction in California's nation world-leading prison population, I don't think any sub-state unit has as many prisoners as California, will be accomplished almost completely by sending fewer people to prison or back to prison who would otherwise have been in prison in the past. So no early release, but nonetheless a rather striking change. And again, this has to be seen against the background of what many of us who study punishment in society call mass incarceration. And I think the way to think about mass incarceration is to forget that you now know what's on the other side of my hand here, and I'm drawing a line across with my hand, these trend lines of male, female, and total incarceration rate in America, state and federal, 1925 to 2008. And if you look at that map, that chart, I should say, or figure, up to 1975, or even say as late as 1981, what you see is this remarkably regular oscillation of America's incarceration rate at around 100. The magic figure of, actually that's 200, that's men. The red figure is total incarceration, and as you'll see, it sort of hugs 100 per 100,000. Like a heartbeat. It goes up, goes down, goes up, goes down. World wars, Great Depressions, wars on poverty, doesn't change a lot. And this led, indeed, many students of punishment in society to believe that maybe punishment was one of those structural equilibria in society that just stays the same no matter what else changes. But then this happened. Starting in about 1979, 1980, the incarceration rate begins to go up, and what appear to be sort of the rolling hills become the Himalaya-like front of this tremendous rise. We see the incarceration rate go from about 100 per 100,000 nationwide to about 400 per 100,000. And California is just about at that national average. Here's California's, the California picture. I used to show this along with the figure of the spending on higher education and prisons. It's now too depressing to show that to students. So I don't want to get you too agitated. But I feel very personal about this story because I've seen it. And while I may look as old as Methuselah to you, I haven't been here that long. So in absolute terms, California went from having fewer than 25,000 prisoners when I began as a Cal undergraduate in 1977 to more than 100,000 by the time I received my doctorate and law degree. Hey, I wasn't the fastest student, but that was still in 1990 or so. And nearly 180,000 by the time I returned to Cal as a professor in 2003. So I was out of state for a lot of that. I'm not the actual cause of any of that change. But as you can see, a very big deal indeed. And it's against this background that I want to suggest we're in a moment of extraordinary change. If I'd given you this lecture in 2004, 2005, 2006, I would have been talking about how we're hanging there at the top of this extraordinary rise in incarceration rates. We seem to be at a potentially a new stable equilibrium. Is anything going to come along and begin to change and drive down California's incarceration rates? And what went with them, which was very much, and we won't talk about this as much during the term, but very much of a law enforcement crackdown on large American cities, and especially the minority populations of those cities. This tremendous growth in prison population is, on the one hand, it's a mass phenomena. People from all kinds of communities have been recruited, essentially, to end up in prison. But like a lot of mass phenomena in America, it's also very racially skewed. If you're African American and male, your odds of being in prison are hugely higher. So basically, if you're an African American male that was born after 1978, as most of you were, you're likely to spend, basically, it's 50% odds that you'll spend time in prison at some time in your life. Half of those men will spend some time in prison. That's a staggering result. In contrast, about 5% of white males will. Now, if you're a white male without high school education, you can begin to climb up toward that level. If you're a Latino male, you're sort of in the middle between African American males and white males. And if you're a woman, there's a very similar distribution, racially skewed distribution, at a much lower rate of incarceration overall. The women's incarceration is the fastest growing part of it. Now, I want to suggest, are in the middle of change, and for the moment, this change is going to be emblemized by a chart that you can find right as the lead off at the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation website, in which we are beginning to very systematically reduce our prison population. And as I said, I think this alone would make this a moment of extraordinary change. So in this chart, which is really based on the court order, which has ordered the state to achieve only 137% overcrowded status, it's currently has been at over 200%. As you can see, as of June 2011, it was down to 180%. We just passed another 6-month checkpoint for the department, and apparently, according to the media, they made their target. And they are they're on track to reduce the population to about 110,000 inmates, which, as you know, is a lot, maybe 4 times the number that were there when I was an undergraduate, but significantly lower than the 162,000 we had in 2006, and even more a couple of years before that. Now, just before I turn to the case that is turning this around, let me just say a little bit more about mass incarceration, which we're going to study in great detail later in the course. The key thing is to note that this is not a global phenomenon. It has been highly concentrated in the United States. Some other countries are beginning to go in this direction. But as we'll examine later in the term, although much of the history of punishment shows remarkable uniformity across the globe, the emergence of the prison, for instance, as a central form of punishment, mass incarceration, this tendency to put just phenomenally large numbers of people in prison and to do so on a kind of generic basis. Not one, it's sort of not like getting to Cal, where you need a lot of highly individualized profiles to sort of get picked at this very elite institution. It's much more like high school. So, if you meet these criteria, you're in. If you're over this age, you're in. We've done that with our prisons. This has not been widely followed around the world. Some other countries have followed us. Much of the United States has gone in this direction, however. And this has very much now dominates, this kind of incarceration now dominates the American landscape. So let's talk a little bit about Brown and where it may be taking us. And the question I ask as the title of this lecture is, must we treat prisoners humanely? And I ask it with some irony, but also it's because it's a question that needs asking. The irony, of course, is that, like all right-minded people, I, of course, think that we must treat prisoners humanely. But the real question is, how did a state like California, not a backwater of the world or the United States, but generally thought of as the forefront of political life, educational and scientific attainment, culture in many respects, how could the United States, how could California, even within the United States as a whole, have ended up even raising this question of whether prisoners need to be treated or deserve to be treated humanely? And so I want to read this quote from the majority opinion here. I'll read you a number of quotes, because the majority in this Brown versus Platter decision is a very narrowly voted decision. 5 voted to uphold this population reduction order. 4 voted in dissent. So this is razor sharp. The next Supreme Court justice appointment could change it, and that's worth bearing in mind. But while it was close in vote, it was not close in tone. That is, the justices who wrote the majority wrote a very strong majority opinion, as you can see from this language. And the majority really goes to this question of the humanity of inmates. And they did so not just citing old cases the way courts like to do. They did some of that, but also by putting in new and very strong language. So let me start with a quote from Justice Kennedy. Not that one, but I'll get to that one in a moment. But earlier than that in the opinion, he writes, and this goes very much to this question of what do prisoners deserve, or what may we do to them, how may we treat them. Kennedy writes, as a consequence of their own actions, prisoners may be deprived of rights that are fundamental to liberty. Prisoners may be deprived of rights that are fundamental to liberty. Yet the law and the Constitution demand recognition of certain other rights. Prisoners retain the essence of human dignity inherent in all persons. Respect for that dignity animates the 8th Amendment prohibition against cruel and unusual punishment. Now, to students of the court's jurisprudence on prisons, this was very strong language. And as we'll see, and we'll study some of these cases in the coming weeks, the Supreme Court in the last few decades especially has taken a very deferential view toward especially state prisons and penal policies. For instance, when the 3 strikes case was before the Supreme Court 5 or 6 years ago, they upheld California's rather draconian sentences, saying that states have a right to make their own judgments about penal objectives and how to accomplish them. So here, when you have the Supreme Court giving a very stern lecture to the state of California, and there's no doubt when you read this case, and you will, and I urge you to kind of read it a couple times throughout the course, there's a marked degree of anger in the court, in the majority's voice here. California is being very much taken to the woodshed in this opinion, and called on the carpet, if you will, for forgetting this essential truth that prisoners retain the essence of human dignity. Now, the quote, I want to then read the quote that I put up on this slide, because that's all very well. What does it mean in practice? A prison that deprives prisoners of basic sustenance, including adequate medical care, is incompatible with the concept of human dignity and has no place in civilized society. Again, that, in terms of playgrounds and sports yards around America, that may not be fighting words, but this is very strong language for a Supreme Court justice to be using to a state. They're basically telling California, your failure to provide basic humane medical care to prisoners is not compatible with the concept of human dignity, and it doesn't belong in a civilized society. Right? California is essentially Mississippi in 1965, a state that is an embarrassment in this regard to the